when it's not a good day, I feel like I'm handcuffed by both arms to dementia, and it decides what I do that day. I always like to be the 51% in control, and when I'm having a bad day, I usually have probably down to 20%, and so I describe it like a fog descending on the brain, and it's very hard to work out the reality of the day. And so I either give in and hide under the duvet, or I venture out and walk in my village if I'm at home, because being outside seems to dilute the dementia. Oh, that's how I like to see it. And if I've got any chance of coming out of this fog, it will be outside.
And on those days when the fog descends, can you also constantly remind yourself that it will pass?
As long as I can say to myself, tomorrow might be better, then I know it will pass. It's when a time comes that thought doesn't enter my head that I know, well, that other people will know dementia has got me.
So this is a huge part of what lies behind your books, isn't it? Explaining exactly that to people, that when your Wendy can no longer recognise Wendy,
yes,
this is a time that you don't want to still be.
Yeah, I don't want to be that Wendy. And many people have said to me, but you might be happy. And I want to shout at them and say, I don't care whether I'm happy. I don't want to be totally reliant on other people, which is what it will come to. I don't want other people to decide whether I can go for a walk, when I eat, when I drink, when I go to bed. I want to have the autonomy that I have now. And I truly believe that in this country we have so little choice over our death. And it's the one thing that's 100% guaranteed to the world's population, yet we give it so little airplay, give it so little value.
And you make such a good point in the book that throughout all of our lives, we are really encouraged to try and make good choices about our health. You know, the message from the medical profession, from the NHS, from government, is to constantly look for how to make yourself better and do things involving choices.
Yeah.
But when it comes to control over our death, we
none.
don't have that conversation, do we?
No. The NHS over the years has done a magnificent job of finding cures, but they're never going to find a cure for death. And so it's always bugged me that it's as though it happens to someone else. It doesn't happen to you. I remember when we were writing the book, how it was common, it was normal for people pre-NHS to die at home. We accepted that would happen. But once the NHS came into existence, it was almost as if we relinquished responsibility for dying. It didn't happen to us anymore. It was someone else's problem. And so we've almost grown into a society that denies death instead of valuing what people believe in as their own good death.
You also collate some very interesting statistics about how we think about death and how other people have talked about death. In a 2021 report, Public Attitudes to Death and Dying, which presumably was government funded at the time, 70% of people felt comfortable discussing the subject of death, but only 14% actually had.
You know, I know, isn't that ridiculous? You know, it's that, just as with my 2 previous books, there was this stigma against dementia. And people said to me they had my books on their bookshelf for years, 2 years, one person said. And when she had the courage to open it, suddenly she thought, what on earth have I been waiting for? And I unravelled the mysteries of dementia for her. Well, I want people to trust me that one final time and allow me to unravel this mystery that is going to happen to all of us. And people underestimate this value of the power of talking. We seem to ignore talking about death because of that fear of it, the unknown. But it actually is such a powerful enabler to live if you discuss death. It's almost as if you've unburdened your head with all these thoughts of what ifs and are now able to live your life as you want it, knowing that others will take care of you in the way that you want to in the future and for your death. So I don't understand people call them difficult conversations, but they're not difficult as the words are quite simple. They're uncomfortable. And I would say to everybody, have these conversations while you're well, not when you're needing to have them. Because when you're needing to have them, there's this inevitability about them. Whereas if you're well, they're almost hypothetical and able to cope with them.
So let's put some facts into this then. What should be in that conversation around death? If we start by talking about the medical and physical side of death, what do you think people need to know?
Everybody should have a lasting power of attorney, no matter what their age, whether they have any serious illness. Everybody can have the basic lasting power of attorney to simply sign your health needs over to someone else who knows you if you get run over by a bus and are in a coma. It also takes care of your finances. You know, it takes care of so much hurt and aggravation for those that are left if you talk.
And in the lasting power of attorney, what can you stipulate? Does it talk about your wish not to be resuscitated?
You don't need to, in the lasting power of attorney, all you need to do is hand over your wishes to someone else. You don't need to write the detail in a lasting power of attorney. This is what makes this society so complicated, is that different areas have different forms, and the form that I use to express my wishes is called a respect form. Not every area has respect forms yet, but that states that I do not want to be resuscitated. That states all the nitty-gritty of healthcare. But you can have all the forms in the world. If you haven't had the conversation with the people that you're going to hand your life over to, they're pointless, they're worthless. Because how do they know what they're going to say?
This is such an important point as well, isn't it, Wendy?
Yeah.
That you need to tell people not only what you want, but where to find the legal bits and pieces that will enable them to do and to follow through your wishes. So you've got the lasting power of attorney. You've got the respect form. How would somebody in a moment of emergency, though, know what to do? Would that always be a loophole? If a paramedic is called for something, how would they know?
If a paramedic is called to my house, I've got a sticker on my front door that tells them to look in the fridge. And in the fridge, normally people have their medication, but I've got my respect form that says don't give me any medication. But that only applies if I have an accident in my county, because the paramedics are linked up to my respect form. If I crossed over my county into the next one and I had a accident, they'd be pumping me and doing all the things I don't want to, simply because nothing's connected in this country. Nothing is simple. I always carry mine with me so that when they're leafing through everything to find out who you are, they'll find my respect form. But it shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't be so complicated.
And certainly now we live in a digital age.
Yeah, exactly.
With data available, it does seem extraordinary because so many people must find themselves in incredibly difficult situations with relatives because of all of these gaps.
And that's why it's not only the paperwork but the conversations. If the conversations have been had, then at least there might be somebody to say, hang on, this person has a respect form, ring her GP, something like that. You know, at least they have a voice then. If they don't know, they'll be going with whatever the paramedic has said because they believe it to be in their best interest. But so many paramedics are grateful to people that have do not resuscitate. Like I've got my band that says do not resuscitate, because the paramedic knows what damage can be done in resuscitation. And so to have that, to almost give them permission not to resuscitate you, it's a relief for them as well.
You say some very interesting things in the book, and you meet and talk with people in the book as well, who really want to get across the message that for some people to look at death as being the ultimate sadness is not what they wish for themselves and for people around them. So I wonder what you can tell us about the way that you have encouraged people who love you to think about what will happen when you die.
Oh goodness, we're forever having conversations. My girls roll their eyes when I say, can we have a family meeting? Because they know it's going to be something random. And I've planned, well actually I thought I planned my funeral for them so they didn't have to worry about that, because I didn't want a service. I didn't want anything like that. I wanted to be cremated, but straight to cremation and then have a celebration event. But because we talked, my oldest daughter said, "Oh, but that's the part of the grieving process for me. I want you to have a cremation that we can all come to." So through talking, that made us compromise on what we knew would happen, because we discussed it. It wasn't a big deal. I thought I was doing the best for them, but in fact I was taking away part of the grieving process.
I think as well, one of the things that really made me think in your book was some descriptions of actually how humans die. And we see a very sanitised fictional version of death, don't we? Which really bears very little relation to how people die. People have been generous in sharing their experiences with you, haven't they? So I wonder if you could share some with us.
We heard some very traumatic stories from people, and I can't remember people's names, sadly, but there was one gentleman whose father had died alone in the garage with the pipe and the exhaust.
Well, this is Paul Blomfeld's
Oh, that was
father.
the man, the MP,
Yes,
the MP. And how sad that he had to do that just because his father didn't want to experience the end stages of cancer. I mean, that is just tragic, that people have to die alone and their family have to cope with the finding the person. You know, that shouldn't be allowed to happen. But also the family of the Scottish lady, she died a dreadful death with cancer that her children knew she would never want, but there was nothing they could do to prevent all the trauma and the stress that was happening before their eyes. And again, their mum didn't want that. Their mum wanted to die before that stage, but of course there is no choice that we're open to.
So that was Sarah's mother, wasn't it, who had esophageal cancer?
Oh, yes.
Yes. And it's a very, very
aggressive
description of how she died. So that takes us to a discussion, doesn't it, about assisted dying and about having control over the end of your life. And you're very clear, I know, Wendy, that assisted dying is something that does have a vulnerable aspect to it in terms of law, and there are problems associated with us. But if you were a lawmaker, what would be the very best way that you think a law could be drawn up?
Well, in this country, we're so far behind so many other countries that we haven't even got to the starting point. You know, we don't allow people with less than 6 months to live to choose whether they use assisted dying. So we have to have that starting point before society will accept that there's people like me with dementia that can choose assisted dying. But it happens in other countries. In Holland they have the review every 6 months. Are you still sure you want that to happen, etc. And we seem so third world almost in this country on the subject of dying. And it's because I found out that the opponents of it believe that the vulnerable will be shoehorned into assisted dying. But that happens nowadays. You know, there are people in care homes who are automatically put on the DNR register without any conversation having had. You know, that's wrong. That happens. And oh dear, I've forgotten what question you asked me. Sorry.
No, so the big question, I suppose, Wendy, is just if assisted dying was allowed in this country, what difference would it be making to you now in your current life?
I would live for far longer because I knew I had that get out clause. It's like in America, there's so many people eligible for magic potion, I think they call it. And they have that magic potion in their hands, but they choose not to use it because they have that choice. We're not given any choice. We're not allowed that autonomy to decide what a good death looks like for us. But the other debate is around palliative care. They're saying, well, money should be spent on palliative care to make that perfect. Well, yes, of course it should. But it shouldn't be a either or. I respect other people's choices who would never choose assisted dying. But I'm just asking them to respect my choice.
So when somebody says to you, as Baroness Finlay does,
when you talk
to her, and she sits in the House of Lords, she was a doctor and she opposes assisted dying.
Yeah.
When she says, well, Wendy, maybe a treatment will become available, during the next 6 months that would enable you to live a longer, healthier life. So assisted dying would have taken that away from you.
But I'll be dead. I wouldn't know that. I'll have chosen when I want, not when I believe something might come along. It's like people focus on these magic moments of joy. I think I quote it was probably Baroness Finlay again, who told me about the man in the care home that played the piano and brought everyone joy for, I don't know, an hour a day. But I said to her, but what about the other 23 hours? Would he have chosen to have other people, be dependent on other people? Would he have chosen to be there? Would he have chosen to be reliant on everybody? And if he would have chosen, then that's wonderful. I'm so pleased for him. But it's not a choice I want to make. I don't want to have an hour of magic moments each day.
Let's talk about just one magic moment that is coming up for you.
Oh.
When you came in today, you noticed the view, first thing we all do, and you are actually going to abseil down one of these buildings behind us.
I certainly am. My very last wacky challenge, as I call them, for charity is in September. And I'm going to free fall abseil, not just abseil, but free fall, so I'll just fling myself off the top of the cheese grater building. I don't know what its proper name is. I'm sure it must have a proper name.
Let's stick with the cheese grater, whatever its proper name, it doesn't matter.
And I just can't wait to step off that top of that building and just fly like a bird.
And is it just too much of a cliche to say that there's a tiny chink of fearlessness that your dementia has given you?
Absolutely, it's given me a huge, big bucket full of fearlessness.
But that would add to the argument that we as a society should encourage people like you to stay with us as long as you can.
Oh, but it comes back down to choice. It comes back down to that thought that take an animal and you desperately want to keep your dog that's been with you for 15 years. But it's you that wants to keep the dog. The dog is suffering and you know that the kindest thing is to let them go, let them die. Why can't we have that same thought for humans?
Brilliant place to end it. Thank you, Wendy.
Yeah.
Thank you.